The crash of the UES Thunderbolt shatters the tranquil forest of Ithoria. Lieutenant Patrick Webb, combat medic and sole survivor, crawls from the smoking wreckage. His uniform, torn and bloodied, marks him as a potential threat to the alien world he now finds himself stranded upon. Patrick's hands shake as he activates his emergency beacon. The dense alien foliage surrounding him rustles with unfamiliar sounds. He scans the crash site, gathering what supplies he can salvage. Unbeknownst to him, a pair of curious eyes watches his every move. Nina, a young Ithorian botanist, crouches in the underbrush. Her heart races as she observes the strange creature emerging from the fallen sky vessel. The human's actions seem methodical, almost predatory. She watches as Patrick treats his own wounds with quick, practiced motions. As darkness descends, Patrick constructs a makeshift camp near the crash site. The forest comes alive with nocturnal sounds, putting him on edge. A twig snaps nearby. Patrick's military training kicks in. He grabs his weapon, aiming it towards the source of the noise. Nina freezes, her breath caught in her throat. She's inadvertently revealed her position. Patrick's finger hovers over the trigger, ready to neutralize the potential threat. But as Nina's form becomes visible in the dim light, he hesitates. The moment is enough for Nina to bolt, disappearing into the thick foliage. Patrick lowers his weapon, mind racing. He's encountered an intelligent alien species. The implications are enormous. He sets off in pursuit, following Nina's trail through the alien forest. Signs of civilization begin to appear, structures seamlessly integrated with the natural environment. Approaching cautiously, Patrick is acutely aware of the panic his arrival might cause. Meanwhile, Nina reaches her village, breathless and wide-eyed. She warns the elders of the dangerous human she encountered. The news spreads like wildfire through the Ithorian settlement. The village elders convene, debating their course of action: fight, flee, attempt communication. They've never directly interacted with humans before. The atmosphere is tense, filled with fear and uncertainty. Patrick reaches the outskirts of the settlement. He raises his hands in a universal gesture of peace, heart pounding. The Ithorians emerge, led by their chief and a group of warriors. Their alien features are a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Despite the language barrier, Patrick attempts to convey his non-hostile intentions. He gestures slowly, deliberately. From his pack, he retrieves some of his medical supplies, offering them as a token of goodwill. Nina watches from the crowd, her initial fear giving way to fascination. The human's behavior doesn't match her expectations of a violent invader. She begins to question her assumptions. The Ithorian chief studies Patrick intently. After a tense moment, he accepts the offering with a nod. It's a calculated risk, an opportunity to learn about these mysterious humans firsthand. Patrick is allowed to enter the village, flanked by guards. As he's led through the settlement, Patrick's eyes widen. The Ithorian's botanical technology is unlike anything he's ever seen. Plants and structures coexist in perfect harmony. The potential for an alliance between their species becomes clear. The procession stops before the Ithorian council. Patrick stands tall, aware that his actions now could shape the future of human-Ithorian relations. He takes a deep breath, preparing to navigate the complex dance of alien customs and potential misunderstandings. The fate of two species hangs in the balance as Patrick faces the alien council. His skills as a combat medic have prepared him for high-pressure situations, but nothing quite like this. As he begins his attempt at communication, both humans and Ithorians stand on the brink of a new era of interstellar cooperation or conflict. Patrick drew a deep breath, acutely aware of the Ithorian council's scrutiny. The alien faces before him were a mix of curiosity and wariness, their leaf-like skin patterns shifting in the dim light of the chamber. At the center sat Elder Zorn, his stern gaze fixed on Patrick. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken questions. Patrick's mind raced, searching for a way to bridge the vast gulf between their species. He reached for his belt, movement slow and deliberate to avoid alarming the guards flanking him. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber as Patrick activated his universal translator. The small device hummed to life, its soft blue glow casting eerie shadows on the organic walls. Patrick held it up, hoping the Ithorians would recognize it as a tool rather than a weapon. "I come in peace," Patrick said, his words echoing strangely in the cavernous space. The translator buzzed, processing the alien language. After a moment, it produced a series of clicks and whistles that Patrick hoped approximated his message. Elder Zorn leaned forward, intrigue replacing some of the suspicion in his eyes. He gestured to one of the guards, who approached with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Patrick noticed movement in the crowd. The young Ithorian he'd encountered in the forest, Nina, he recalled, stepped forward. Her iridescent skin shimmered as she spoke, her graceful gestures adding emphasis to her words. Though Patrick couldn't understand her, he sensed she was recounting their first meeting. As Nina spoke, Patrick's gaze was drawn to her alien beauty. The way she moved, the shimmer of her skin in the bioluminescent light. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen. He found himself captivated, only barely registering the reaction of the council to her words. Elder Zorn's voice cut through Patrick's reverie. The translator struggled with the complex language, but Patrick gathered that the council leader was requesting a demonstration of his abilities. An injured Ithorian warrior was brought forward, a deep gash visible on his arm. Patrick nodded, understanding the test before him. He reached for his medical kit, movements careful and measured. The council chamber fell silent as Patrick approached the wounded warrior. He activated his medical scanner, its soft whir the only sound in the tense atmosphere. The device's holographic display flickered to life, showing a detailed image of the Ithorian's internal structure. Patrick's training took over. His hands moved with practiced precision as he cleaned the wound, applied a regenerative gel, and sealed it with a bioadhesive strip. The warrior's eyes widened in surprise as the pain visibly eased. Murmurs of approval rippled through the chamber. Even Elder Zorn's stern expression softened slightly. Patrick stepped back, hoping his skills had helped bridge the gap between their species. As night fell, the council reached a decision. Patrick was to be allowed to stay in the village, under supervision. To his surprise and secret delight, Nina volunteered to be his guide. They walked through the village, the universal translator growing more effective with each passing minute. Nina's questions came in a rapid-fire stream, her curiosity about humans matching Patrick's fascination with the Ithorians. "Your technology," Nina said, gesturing to Patrick's medical kit. "It's so different from ours. How does it work without plants?" Patrick smiled, trying to explain the basics of human medical science. Nina listened intently, her eyes wide with wonder. In turn, she described Ithorian botanical technology, painting a picture of a society in perfect harmony with nature. As they reached the small hut assigned to Patrick, a moment of awkwardness fell between them. There was so much more to say, to ask, to learn, but the night was late and both were keenly aware of the delicate nature of their newfound connection. "I'll return in the morning," Nina said, her translator struggling with the complexities of Ithorian farewells. "There is much to show you." Patrick nodded, watching as she disappeared into the bioluminescent forest. Inside the hut, he activated his emergency beacon's long-range mode, a mixture of hope and trepidation filling him. Would it bring rescue or danger? As he settled onto the soft, plant-based bedding, Patrick's mind whirled with the day's events. The beauty of the Ithorian world, the potential for a groundbreaking alliance, and the memory of Nina's shimmering skin in the forest light. Unknown to Patrick, his actions had set other events in motion. Far above the peaceful Ithorian village, a hostile ship's sensors pinged with the detection of his beacon. In the cold vastness of space, a course was plotted, one that would soon bring conflict to this newfound peace. In her own dwelling, Nina pored over ancient Ithorian texts, searching for any mention of beings like Patrick. Her fingers traced the intricate patterns of human anatomy displayed on her datapad, marveling at the similarities and differences between their species. As both human and Ithorian drifted into uneasy sleep, the stage was set for a new day, one that would challenge their budding trust, test their newfound alliance, and perhaps forge a connection neither had anticipated. The first rays of Ithoria's twin suns filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Patrick blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day came rushing back, the crash, his encounter with Nina, and the tense meeting with the Ithorian Council. A soft knock on the hut's organic door jolted him fully awake. Nina's voice called out, her words now clearer thanks to the rapidly adapting universal translator. "Patrick, are you ready to explore our world?" He quickly gathered his gear, excitement building at the prospect of learning more about this alien ecosystem. As he stepped outside, the sight of Nina took his breath away. In the morning light, her iridescent skin seemed to glow with an inner radiance. "Good morning," he managed, acutely aware of the strange flutter in his chest. "Where are we headed?" Nina's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "I want to show you some of our rarest botanical specimens. There's a particular flower I think you'll find fascinating." As they set off into the lush forest, Patrick marveled at the seamless integration of Ithorian technology with nature. Structures grew organically from the trees themselves, while pathways seemed to form and reform with each step. Nina led the way, her graceful movements a stark contrast to Patrick's more deliberate gait. She pointed out various plants, explaining their properties and uses in Ithorian society. Patrick listened intently, his medical mind drawing parallels to Earth's pharmacology. "This reminds me of some of our medicinal plants," he commented, examining a vibrant red leaf. "On Earth, we've barely scratched the surface of our botanical potential." Nina's antenna twitched with interest. Perhaps our peoples could learn much from each other in this regard. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the vegetation grew denser, more primordial. Nina's pace quickened with excitement. "We're nearing the glade," she explained. "The Ithoria nightbloom only grows in very specific conditions. It's incredibly rare." They pushed through a curtain of hanging vines, emerging into a small clearing. In the center, bathed in a shaft of sunlight, stood a single, exquisite flower. Its petals were closed tight, a deep indigo color that seemed to pulse with hidden energy. "It's beautiful," Patrick breathed, approaching slowly. Nina nodded, her voice hushed with reverence. "The night bloom only opens under very specific conditions. Its pollen is said to have unique properties." As they leaned in to examine the flower more closely, their movements disturbed the delicate balance of the glade. Suddenly, the night bloom's petals began to unfurl, releasing a cloud of shimmering pollen. Patrick and Nina stumbled back, laughing as the glittering dust settled on their skin and clothes. For a moment, the absurdity of their situation, a human and an alien covered in alien plant spores, struck them both as hilarious. But as the laughter faded, a strange sensation began to creep over them. Patrick felt a warmth spreading through his body, his senses sharpening. He became acutely aware of Nina's presence, the subtle movements of her breathing, the play of light on her skin. Nina, too, seemed affected. Her eyes widened, fixed on Patrick with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "We should head back," Patrick suggested, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Nina nodded, but as they turned to leave, the forest seemed to have transformed. The paths they had followed were now obscured, the landmarks unfamiliar. "This way," Nina said, but her usual confidence was lacking. They pushed through the undergrowth, the heat and humidity seeming to increase with each step. Patrick's mind felt foggy, his thoughts continually drifting back to Nina. He found himself watching the sway of her movements, mesmerized by the alien grace of her form. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath them. They slid down a short, mossy embankment, landing with a splash in a hidden hot spring. The warm, mineral-rich water enveloped them, mingling with the pollen still clinging to their skin. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the tension between them palpable. The heat of the spring seemed to amplify the pollen's effects, lowering their inhibitions and heightening their awareness of each other. "Patrick," Nina whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I've never felt like this before." He swallowed hard, fighting against the overwhelming urge to close the distance between them. "Neither have I," he admitted. Slowly, almost inevitably, they drew closer, their hands intertwined, exploring the unfamiliar textures of each other's skin. Patrick marveled at the silky smoothness of Nina's leaf-like epidermis, while she traced the contours of his more rigid human form. As their lips met, a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them. The kiss deepened, transcending the boundaries of their species. In that moment, they were no longer human and Ithorian, but simply two beings drawn together by a force greater than themselves. Their encounter was a dance of discovery, each movement revealing new sensations, new possibilities. The biological differences between their species only served to heighten the experience, turning every touch into an exploration of uncharted territory. Lost in their passion, Patrick and Nina remained oblivious to the events unfolding around them. They didn't hear the distant hum of an approaching ship, nor the frantic preparations in the Ithorian village. In the council chamber, Elder Zorn received the urgent message from the planetary defense system. His face darkened as he processed the implications. "An unidentified ship has entered our atmosphere," he announced to the gathered elders. "It's on a direct course for our location." The council erupted into worried chatter. One voice rose above the rest. "Could it be connected to the humans' arrival?" Zorn's expression was grim. "It seems likely. We must prepare for all possibilities. Where is Patrick now?" A young scout stepped forward, her antenna quivering with anxiety. "Elder, Patrick and Nina left early this morning to explore the deep forest. We haven't seen them since." Zorn's eyes narrowed. Without their unexpected human ally, they were at a distinct disadvantage against this unknown threat. "Mobilize our defenses," he ordered, "and send out search parties for Patrick and Nina. We need them here, now." As the Ithorians scrambled to prepare, the Zar'cath ship touched down in a nearby clearing. Captain Drock, his scales glinting in the alien sunlight, surveyed the lush landscape with cold calculation. "Fan out," he commanded his infiltration team. "Find the human and any examples of advanced technology. And remember, we're here to gather intelligence. Avoid detection if possible, but do not hesitate to use force if necessary." The Zar'cath soldiers melted into the forest, their adaptive camouflage blending seamlessly with the vegetation. As they advanced, their sensors picked up an unusual energy signature emanating from a nearby hot spring. "Captain," one of the soldiers reported via comlink, "we're detecting high levels of bioelectric activity. It could be some kind of Ithorian power source." Drock's eyes gleamed with avarice. "Excellent. Proceed with caution. This could be exactly what we're looking for." As the Zar'cath forces closed in on the hot spring, Patrick and Nina remained lost in their intimate moment, unaware of the danger rapidly approaching. The future of two worlds hung in the balance, poised on the edge of a clash that would test the limits of their newfound connection. The future of two worlds hung in the balance, poised on the edge of a clash that would test the limits of their newfound bond. A sudden chill ran through Patrick, breaking the spell. The pollen's effects began to dissipate, leaving him clear-headed but acutely aware of the vulnerable position they were in. Nina seemed to sense the shift as well, her eyes widening with renewed clarity. "We should go," Patrick whispered, his military instincts kicking in. "Something doesn't feel right." They quickly scrambled out of the hot spring, hastily donning their clothes. The forest around them seemed different now, charged with an unseen tension. As they attempted to regain their bearings, a faint sound caught Patrick's attention, the unmistakable crunch of approaching footsteps. Without hesitation, Patrick grabbed Nina's hand and pulled her behind the broad trunk of a massive tree. They pressed their backs against the rough bark, barely daring to breathe as a group of figures passed by mere meters from their hiding spot. Patrick's heart raced as he caught sight of the intruders. Their sleek, dark armor was a stark contrast to the lush forest environment, but it was the insignia on their shoulders that made his blood run cold. He recognized it instantly, the same emblem worn by the forces that had attacked the UES Thunderbolt. "Zar'cath?" he mouthed silently to Nina, whose antenna quivered with understanding and fear. As the patrol moved out of earshot, Patrick's mind raced. The presence of Zar'cath infiltrators meant both he and the Ithorian village were in imminent danger. They needed to warn Elder Zorn and the council immediately. "We have to get back to the village," Patrick whispered urgently. "Can you lead us there without being detected?" Nina nodded, her earlier playfulness replaced by steely commitment. She took point, guiding them through the dense undergrowth with silent efficiency. Patrick followed closely, his senses on high alert for any sign of Zar'cath patrols. Their progress was slow and tense, each step carefully placed to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. The forest, once a place of wonder and discovery, now felt like a dangerous maze filled with unseen threats. As they navigated a particularly dense thicket, a flash of movement caught Patrick's eye. He instinctively dropped into a defensive crouch, pulling Nina down with him. A moment later, a figure emerged from the foliage, but it wasn't a Zar'cath soldier. "Lyra!" Nina exclaimed in a hushed voice, recognizing the young Ithorian scout. Lyra's antenna twitched with relief. "I've been searching for you," she whispered urgently. "The village is on high alert. An unknown ship has landed, and Elder Zorn fears the worst." Patrick quickly filled Lyra in on the Zar'cath presence. The young scout's eyes widened with alarm, but she maintained her composure. "I know a secret path back to the settlement," Lyra said. "Follow me and stay low." The trio set off, with Lyra leading them through hidden trails and natural tunnels formed by intertwining roots. Patrick marveled at the Ithorians' intimate knowledge of their forest home, even as his combat-trained mind cataloged potential defensive positions and escape routes. As they neared the village outskirts, the sounds of controlled chaos reached their ears. Ithorian voices called out instructions, punctuated by the rustle of rapidly growing plant life. They emerged from the forest to find the settlement transformed. Living barriers of dense, thorny vines had sprung up around the perimeter. Camouflage nets, woven from leaves and flowers, obscured buildings and pathways. In the center of it all, Elder Zorn stood with the council, coordinating the defense efforts with calm authority. Patrick, Nina, and Lyra rushed to the council chamber. Zorn's expression was grave as Patrick quickly briefed him on the Zar'cath threat, explaining their advanced weaponry and ruthless tactics. "Your arrival has brought both opportunity and danger, Patrick," Zorn said solemnly. "We must act quickly if we are to protect our people." The elder turned to Patrick, his gaze intense. "Your combat experience could be invaluable. Will you help us fortify our defenses?" Patrick nodded without hesitation. "Of course, I'll do whatever I can." For the next hour, Patrick worked alongside the Ithorian warriors, sharing strategies to counter the Zar'cath's expected assault patterns. He was impressed by their quick grasp of tactical concepts, their natural affinity for their environment, allowing them to implement defensive measures he could never have imagined. Nina worked tirelessly as well, using her extensive botanical knowledge to enhance the protective properties of the living barriers. Under her guidance, the plants grew denser, their thorns sharper and more numerous. Their efforts were put to the test sooner than expected. A warning cry went up from the eastern perimeter. A small group of Zar'cath scouts had breached the outer defenses. Patrick sprinted toward the commotion, an Ithorian energy weapon in hand. He arrived to find a fierce skirmish already underway. The Zar'cath's advanced technology gave them a significant advantage, but the Ithorians fought with desperate courage, using their home terrain to maximum effect. Taking cover behind a partially grown barricade, Patrick assessed the situation. He spotted a Zar'cath soldier attempting to flank the Ithorian position and took aim. The energy weapon hummed in his hands as he squeezed the trigger, sending a bolt of blue light streaking through the air. It struck the Zar'cath soldier squarely in the chest, sending him sprawling. The brief but intense firefight ended with the Zar'cath scouts retreating, leaving behind 2 of their wounded. As the Ithorians secured the prisoners, Patrick examined the Zar'cath weapons and armor with growing concern. Their technological superiority was even more pronounced than he had feared. Returning to the council chamber, Patrick found Elder Zorn deep in discussion with Nina and several other Ithorian leaders. The atmosphere was tense, the reality of their situation setting in. "We held them off this time," Patrick said, "but they'll be back in greater numbers. We need something to even the odds." A thought struck him, a potential lifeline in their desperate situation. "My ship, the Thunderbolt, its armory might still be intact. If we could retrieve those weapons, we'd stand a much better chance against the Zar'cath." Elder Zorn considered the proposal, his antenna twitching with concern. "It's risky, but I see no other option. How do you suggest we proceed?" Patrick quickly outlined a plan, his military training kicking into high gear. "A small team, no more than 4. We'll move faster and attract less attention. I'll need your best warriors." 2 Ithorians stepped forward, Kale and Vex, their bodies marked with the intricate patterns of veteran defenders. Nina moved to Patrick's side, her eyes meeting his with unwavering purpose. As they prepared for the mission, gathering supplies and reviewing the route to the crash site, Patrick found himself acutely aware of Nina's presence. Their shared experience in the hot spring had forged a connection that transcended mere physical attraction. He saw in her a strength and bravery that matched his own, a partner he could trust in the trials to come. The team set out as darkness fell, using the dense canopy to mask their movements from any Zar'cath patrols. Patrick led the way, his senses hyper-alert for any sign of danger. Nina moved silently beside him, her knowledge of the forest proving invaluable as they navigated the treacherous terrain. As they approached the crash site, Patrick raised his hand, signaling the team to halt. Ahead, barely visible through the foliage, he could make out the sleek forms of Zar'cath soldiers moving around the wreckage of the Thunderbolt. "Looks like Captain Drock had the same idea," Patrick whispered, his mind racing to formulate a new plan. "We'll have to take them out quietly. Kyle, Vex, can you use the forest to get behind them?" The Ithorian warriors nodded, melting into the undergrowth with practiced ease. Patrick turned to Nina, their eyes meeting in the dim light. No words were needed. They both understood the gravity of what came next. Patrick raised 3 fingers, silently counting down. As his last finger dropped, chaos erupted at the crash site. Kyle and Vex emerged from the shadows, their movements a blur as they engaged the Zar'cath guards in close combat. Taking advantage of the distraction, Patrick and Nina rushed forward. Patrick tackled the nearest Zar'cath soldier, his hand clamping over the alien's mouth to muffle any alarm. Nina was right behind him, her slight frame belying her strength as she subdued another guard with a well-placed strike. The skirmish was over in moments, the element of surprise allowing them to overpower the Zar'cath without alerting the main force. Patrick quickly made his way to the Thunderbolt's ruptured hull, locating the hidden access panel to the ship's armory. As the panel slid open, revealing racks of advanced human weaponry, Patrick felt a glimmer of hope. He began distributing the weapons to his Ithorian allies, taking a moment to demonstrate their use. "These should give us a fighting chance," he said, impressed by how quickly Kale and Vex adapted to the unfamiliar technology. Suddenly, the ominous whine of approaching engines filled the air. Patrick's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he recognized the sound. "Zar'cath dropships," he hissed. "We're out of time." In that moment, Patrick made a critical decision. He turned to Nina, his voice urgent but steady. "I need your help. We're going to rig the ship's power core to overload. It won't stop them, but it might buy the village more time to prepare." Nina nodded, her trust in Patrick absolute. Together, they raced to the Thunderbolt's engineering section, their movements perfectly in sync as they worked to destabilize the delicate systems. As the power core's hum rose to a dangerous pitch, Patrick knew it was time to leave. He gave the signal, and the team began their frantic race back to the Ithorian village. They plunged into the forest, the sounds of Zar'cath forces growing louder behind them. Energy weapons sizzled through the air, the crack of falling trees adding to the cacophony of approaching danger. As they ran, Patrick caught Nina's eye. In that fleeting glance, he saw a reflection of his own drive, their shared perseverance to protect the Ithorian people and stand against the Zar'cath threat. Their bond, forged in the tranquil glade and tempered by the fires of conflict, had become an unbreakable alloy of trust and shared purpose. With human weapons in hand and vital intelligence about the enemy, Patrick and his team sprinted through the darkened forest. Behind them, the UES Thunderbolt's power core ticked inexorably toward detonation, its impending explosion poised to reshape the battlefield and potentially shift the balance of power in this unexpected war. As they raced against time, Patrick's mind was already formulating their next move. The real test still lay ahead, defending the Ithorian village against the full might of the Zar'cath assault. But for now, all that mattered was the pounding of their feet against the forest floor, each step bringing them closer to their allies and the desperate stand that awaited them. As they raced against time, Patrick's mind was already formulating their next move. The real test still lay ahead, defending the Ithorian village against the full might of the Zar'cath assault. But for now, All that mattered was the pounding of their feet against the forest floor, each step bringing them closer to their allies and the desperate stand that awaited. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the forest behind them. The ground shook violently, nearly throwing Patrick off balance. He instinctively reached out to steady Nina as they continued their frantic pace. "The Thunderbolt's core!" Patrick shouted over the reverberating blast. "It bought us some time!" The shockwave rippled through the trees, snapping branches and uprooting smaller plants. Patrick could hear the confused shouts of Zar'cath soldiers in the distance, their pursuit momentarily disrupted by the unexpected detonation. Kyle and Vex took advantage of the chaos, leading the group through a series of hidden paths and natural tunnels. Their intimate knowledge of the forest allowed them to put significant distance between themselves and their pursuers. As they neared the village outskirts, Patrick saw the dramatic transformation of the Ithorian settlement. The living barriers had grown even denser, their thorny vines intertwining to form an almost impenetrable wall. Camouflaged lookout posts dotted the perimeter, staffed by alert Ithorian scouts. Elder Zorn stood at the main entrance, his normally serene features etched with concern. His antenna twitched as he spotted the returning team. "You've succeeded," he said, his eyes widening at the sight of the human weapons. "But at what cost?" Patrick quickly briefed the Elder on their mission and the destruction of the Thunderbolt. "We need to call a war council immediately," he urged. "The Zar'cath won't be far behind us." Within minutes, the Ithorian leaders had gathered in the central chamber. Patrick laid out the stolen Zar'cath weapons alongside the human firearms they had retrieved. He explained the capabilities of each, demonstrating their use to the attentive Ithorians. "These energy weapons are powerful, but they have a significant weakness," Patrick explained, pointing to a vulnerable component. "If we can target this area, we can overload their power cells." The Ithorian warriors nodded, their hands already becoming familiar with the new technology. Patrick marveled at their quick adaptation, a fusion of their own combat skills with the advanced weaponry. As the council discussed strategy, Nina pulled Patrick aside. "I have an idea," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "We can use our botanical knowledge to enhance our defenses even further." Together they worked with a team of Ithorian scientists, combining Patrick's tactical insights with the Ithorians' mastery of plant life. Nina's hands moved with practiced precision as she manipulated the genetic structure of various specimens. "This new strain," she explained, her fingers gently caressing a rapidly growing vine, "will be able to absorb and disperse energy weapon blasts. It's like a living shield." Patrick watched in awe as the enhanced plants took root around the village perimeter, their growth accelerated by Ithorian technology. Within hours, a formidable barrier of energy-resistant vegetation surrounded the settlement. As the final preparations were made, the distant sound of Zar'cath engines filled the air. Patrick's muscles tensed, his body instinctively readying for combat. He turned to Nina, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared commitment. "Stay close," he said softly, handing her one of the human weapons. "We're stronger together." The first wave of Zar'cath attackers emerged from the forest, their energy weapons cutting swaths through the vegetation. But as they approached the village, they found themselves facing a defense unlike anything they had encountered before. Patrick and Kyle led a series of lightning-fast strikes, using the dense foliage as cover. The human weapons packed a punch the Zar'cath weren't expecting, their shots finding weak points in the alien armor. Nina coordinated from a central command post, her voice calm and clear over the Ithorian communication network. "Section 3, deploy the snare vines. Section 5, prepare for counterattack." The battle raged on, with the Ithorians holding their ground against the technologically superior invaders. Patrick found himself in the thick of the fighting, his military training serving him well as he directed the defense. Suddenly, a massive energy blast ripped through the Ithorian lines, sending defenders scattering. Patrick's eyes widened as he saw the source, a towering mech suit, its metal frame gleaming in the forest light. "Fall back!" Patrick shouted, recognizing the game-changing threat. He grabbed Nina's arm, pulling her behind a thick tree trunk as energy bolts sizzled past them. The mech stomped forward, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Patrick could see a figure in the cockpit, Captain Drock, his face twisted with rage as he systematically destroyed the village's outer defenses. Our weapons can't penetrate its shields, Nina said, her voice tinged with frustration. We need another solution. Patrick's mind raced, analyzing the mech's movements and searching for any weakness. His eyes fell on a patch of corrosive fungus growing nearby, and a desperate plan began to form. Nina, he said urgently, that fungus, can we weaponize it? Her eyes lit up with understanding. Yes, I think so, but we'll need to get close to the mech. Working quickly, they gathered samples of the fungus and modified one of the remaining human weapons. Patrick loaded the improvised projectile, his heart pounding as he watched Drock's mech draw closer to the village center. We need to lure it into position, Patrick said, scanning the battlefield. There, that clearing. It's our best shot. Nina nodded, her trust in Patrick evident in her eyes. Together, they moved through the chaotic battlefield, drawing the mech's attention with carefully placed shots. As Drock's war machine stomped into the clearing, Patrick took careful aim. Time seemed to slow as he squeezed the trigger, the fungus-laden projectile arcing through the air. It struck the mech's shield emitter with pinpoint accuracy. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a crackle of energy, the shields began to flicker and waver. Patrick and Nina watched intently as the corrosive fungus spread across the mech's surface, eating through its protective layers. The once invincible war machine began to falter, its movements becoming erratic. Inside the cockpit, Drock's enraged shouts could be heard as he struggled to maintain control. The mech's weapon systems sputtered, no longer able to unleash their devastating firepower. As the fungus continued its relentless assault on the mech's systems, Patrick and Nina exchanged a look of cautious hope. The tide of battle had shifted, but the war was far from finished. The true test of their newfound alliance was yet to come, as the fate of the Ithorian village hung in the balance. Balance. The mech's systems sparked and sputtered, its once fearsome presence reduced to a teetering hulk of metal. Suddenly, the cockpit hatch burst open with a hiss of hydraulics. Captain Drock emerged, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. He leaped from the failing machine, landing with a heavy thud on the forest floor. Patrick's eyes locked onto the Zar'cath leader. Now! He shouted, signaling to the nearby Ithorian warriors. They surged forward, their movements fluid and precise as they surrounded the disoriented captain. Drock reached for his sidearm, but Patrick was faster. A well-aimed shot from his human weapon sent the Zar'cath pistol spinning into the underbrush. Within moments, the invading commander found himself restrained by the very beings he had sought to conquer. As word of Drock's capture spread, the Zar'cath forces began to falter. Confused shouts and the sound of retreating footsteps echoed through the forest. Patrick allowed himself a moment of relief, but his instincts told him this wasn't over. His suspicions were confirmed when a group of Zar'cath soldiers emerged from the tree line, their weapons primed and faces set with unbreakable spirit. At their head strode Lieutenant Vex Kor, his eyes burning with fanatical purpose. "For the glory of the Empire," Vex Kor roared, raising his weapon. "To the central tree!" Patrick's heart raced as he realized their target. The massive, ancient tree at the heart of the Ithorian village was more than just a landmark. It was the lifeblood of their community, a living repository of their technology and spirituality. "Nina," Patrick called out, spotting her across the clearing. "We need to get to the central tree." They sprinted through the chaos of the battlefield, ducking energy blasts and leaping over fallen debris. As they approached the enormous trunk, they saw Elder Zorn and a group of Ithorian defenders already engaged in fierce combat with the Zar'cath elites. The air crackled with energy as weapons fire crisscrossed between the intertwined roots. Patrick and Nina dove behind a thick, gnarled root, narrowly avoiding a barrage of shots. "We need to flank them," Patrick said, his mind racing through tactical options. "If we can—" His words were cut short by Nina's sudden cry of pain. An errant energy blast had caught her in the side, leaving a sizzling wound. She slumped against him, her breathing labored. "Nina!" Patrick's voice was thick with fear and concern. He quickly assessed her injury, his heart sinking as he realized the severity of the burn. "Stay with me," he urged, cradling her head. Elder Zorn appeared beside them, his normally serene features creased with worry. "She needs help," the Ithorian leader said, his antennae twitching anxiously. Patrick's mind raced, searching for a solution. Suddenly, he remembered the night bloom, the bioluminescent flower they had encountered earlier. Its pollen had demonstrated remarkable properties. "Elder Zorn," Patrick said urgently, "the night bloom, could its pollen help her?" The Ithorian's eyes widened. "The sacred night bloom? It's never been used for, but perhaps—" He paused, torn between tradition and necessity. After a moment, he nodded. "Go. Bring the night bloom. We will protect her." Patrick gently laid Nina down, squeezing her hand before rising to his feet. "I'll be right back," he promised. He darted through the battlefield, his every sense heightened by urgency. Zar'cath soldiers appeared in his path, but Patrick moved with single-minded focus, evading their attacks and pushing forward. Reaching the grove where the night bloom grew, Patrick carefully gathered the precious pollen. As he turned to leave, he found his path blocked by 2 Zar'cath soldiers. Without hesitation, he charged, using his momentum to bowl them over. Returning to Nina's side, Patrick found her condition worsening. Her skin had taken on a pale, almost translucent quality. With trembling hands, he applied the night bloom pollen to her wound. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then gradually, a soft glow began to emanate from the injury. The damaged tissue started to knit itself back together, the burn fading as if it had never existed. Nina's eyes fluttered open, meeting Patrick's gaze. A smile tugged at her lips. "That's twice you've saved me now," she whispered. Relief flooded through Patrick, but there was no time to savor the moment. The battle still raged around them, and the Zar'cath forces were pressing their advantage. "Stay here," Patrick told Nina, squeezing her hand once more before rising to rejoin the fight. The Ithorian warriors, bolstered by Patrick's return and Nina's recovery, fought with renewed vigor. Patrick's tactical guidance, combined with their innate connection to the forest, began to turn the tide. Lieutenant Vexicor, seeing his forces falter, snarled in frustration. He reached into his armor and produced a small device. With a few quick taps, the device began to emit a high-pitched whine. Patrick recognized the sound immediately. "It's a distress beacon," he shouted. "They're calling for reinforcements." Even as he spoke, Vexicor was already signaling a retreat. The remaining Zar'cath forces began to fall back, disappearing into the dense forest. As the sounds of battle faded, Patrick turned back to Nina. His breath caught in his throat as he saw her. The night bloom's effect had done more than heal her wound. Her entire body now emitted a soft, pulsating glow. Her eyes, when she opened them, seemed to hold the very essence of the forest within them. "Patrick," she said, her voice filled with wonder, "I can feel the trees, the plants. It's like they're speaking to me." Elder Zorn approached, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. "The night bloom has changed her," he said softly. "This is unprecedented." As the Ithorians began to assess the damage and tend to their wounded, Patrick knew their ordeal was just getting started. The distress beacon meant more Zar'cath forces could be on their way, and Nina's transformation raised questions he couldn't begin to answer. But for now, as he helped Nina to her feet, feeling the warmth of her hand in his, Patrick allowed himself a moment of hope. They had survived this battle. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Together, whatever challenges lay ahead. As the dust settled from the battle, Patrick and Nina wasted no time in preparing for the inevitable Zar'cath counterattack. They gathered the Ithorian warriors and began developing a hybrid defense strategy that combined human military tactics with the unique capabilities of Ithorian biotechnology. Patrick spent his days training the Ithorians in advanced combat techniques, teaching them to move silently through the forest and set up ambush points. His military experience proved invaluable as he showed them how to maximize their natural affinity for the environment. "Remember," he said, demonstrating a low crawl through the underbrush, "use the terrain to your advantage. The Zar'cath rely on their technology. We'll use the forest itself against them." Meanwhile, Nina focused on harnessing her newfound abilities. She discovered that her connection to the plant life went beyond mere communication. She could influence its growth and behavior. Working with Elder Zorn, she began experimenting with ways to enhance the living barriers surrounding the village. One afternoon, as Patrick observed Nina's progress, He watched in awe as she placed her hands on a cluster of thick vines. Her body emitted a soft glow, and the plants responded, growing and intertwining at an accelerated rate to form a dense, impenetrable wall. "Incredible," Patrick murmured, approaching her as she finished. "How does it feel?" Nina turned to him, her eyes shimmering with an otherworldly light. "It's overwhelming, like I can feel the life force of every plant around us. But it's exhilarating too." As they worked side by side, day after day, their bond deepened. The shared danger and common purpose brought them closer, and Patrick found himself increasingly drawn to Nina's tenacity and spirit. One evening, while testing a new plant-based early warning system in a secluded part of the forest, they found themselves alone. The bioluminescent flora cast a soft, ethereal glow around them, creating an intimate atmosphere. Patrick's hand brushed against Nina's as they adjusted a sensor, sending a jolt of electricity through his body. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the tension that had been building between them finally broke. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, hands exploring each other's bodies with an urgency born of their uncertain future. They made love there in the heart of the forest, the glowing plants pulsing in rhythm with their accelerated heartbeats. Afterward, as they lay entwined in each other's arms, Patrick traced the faint luminescent patterns that now adorned Nina's skin. "We should get back," he said softly, though he made no move to leave. Nina nodded, her fingers idly playing with his hair. "We should, but let's stay here, just for a little while longer." Their moment of peace was short-lived. The next morning, Elder Zorn called them to an urgent meeting. The Ithorian leader's face was grave as he shared the information extracted from Captain Draylock. "The Zar'cath Empire has been developing bioweapons," Zorn explained, his antennae twitching nervously. "They seek to harness the unique properties of various alien species. Our abilities make us a prime target." Patrick's mind raced, considering the implications. "We need to contact human reinforcements," he said, an idea forming. "If we could modify the captured Zar'cath communication equipment, we might be able to send a long-range distress signal." Nina frowned. "Wouldn't that risk alerting more Zar'cath forces to our location?" "It's a risk we might have to take," Patrick replied, meeting Elder Zorn's eyes. "It could be our best chance for survival." After careful deliberation, Zorn nodded his approval. "Proceed with caution, Patrick. Our fate may rest on your success." As Patrick worked on modifying the equipment, Nina made a breakthrough in her research. She discovered that her enhanced connection to the plant life allowed her to stimulate rapid growth and mutation in certain species. Excited by the possibilities, Nina pushed herself to explore the limits of her new abilities. She spent hours in deep communion with the forest, coaxing new forms of plant life into existence. However, the process took a heavy toll on her body. Patrick found her one evening, slumped against a tree, her skin pale and clammy. "Nina!" he cried, rushing to her side. "What happened?" She looked up at him with glassy eyes. "I think I pushed too hard, but Patrick, you should see what I can do now." Despite his concern, Patrick couldn't help but be amazed by Nina's creations. She had managed to grow plants with bark as tough as steel and vines that moved with almost animal-like intelligence. "This could give us the edge we need," Patrick said, helping Nina to her feet. "But we need to be careful. I can't lose you." As they continued their preparations, a scout reported unusual seismic activity near the crash site of the UES Thunderbolt. Patrick assembled a small team to investigate, suspecting a connection to the human technology left behind. What they discovered at the site left them awestruck. The ship's remains had become the epicenter of a strange biological phenomenon, a rapidly evolving ecosystem that merged human technology with Ithorian plant life. "This is incredible," Patrick breathed, taking in the sight of metal fused with organic matter, creating hybrid structures unlike anything he'd ever seen. Nina needs to see this. As the team collected samples, they were suddenly attacked by a group of mutated predators, products of this new ecosystem. Patrick's combat skills were put to the test as he fought off a creature that seemed part plant, part machine, and all deadly. "Fall back!" he shouted, firing his weapon at the approaching monsters. The team retreated, narrowly escaping with their precious cargo. Back at the village, Nina's eyes lit up as she examined the samples. With proper cultivation, we could use these to create living weapons and armor, she said, her mind already racing with possibilities. It could level the playing field against the Zar'cath. As Nina worked tirelessly to develop these new bioweapons, Patrick finally succeeded in activating the modified communication device. The signal was sent, a desperate call for help broadcast into the depths of space. But their actions had not gone unnoticed. The village's early warning system, a network of sensitive plants Nina had cultivated, suddenly came alive with activity. Zar'cath scouts, Nina said, her face grim as she interpreted the plant's warnings. They're coming. Patrick's eyebrows furrowed. Then we'd better be ready for them. As the first signs of the approaching Zar'cath forces appeared on the horizon, Nina pushed herself to the limit, using her abilities to rapidly grow and modify the hybrid organisms into usable weapons and armor. The strain proved too much. With a cry of pain, Nina collapsed, her body glowing intensely as it struggled to cope with the enormous energy expenditure. Patrick rushed to her side, cradling her limp form in his arms. "Nina! Nina, stay with me!" he pleaded, his heart pounding with fear as her life hung in the balance. As he desperately tried to stabilize her condition, the sound of Zar'cath war machines echoed through the forest. The battle for the Ithorian world was about to begin, and its outcome would shape the future of both their peoples. Races and her life hung in the balance. As the Zar'cath war machines drew closer, Patrick's combat medic training kicked in. He quickly assessed Nina's vital signs, noting her rapid pulse and shallow breathing. Her skin glowed with an intensity that bordered on painful to look at, and he realized her body was overloaded with energy from her intense connection to the hybrid plant tech organisms. "Hang on, Nina," Patrick muttered, his mind racing through possible solutions. He remembered a risky technique from his advanced medical training, designed to deal with energy weapon overloads. It was a long shot, but it might just work. Patrick turned to Elder Zorn, who hovered nearby with concern etched on his alien features. "I need conductive plant roots, as many as you can gather quickly," he ordered, already pulling out components from his field med kit. As Zorn hurried to comply, Patrick began assembling a makeshift bioelectrical grounding system. He combined human medical technology with the conductive properties of Ithorian plant life, creating a network of energy-dispersing pathways. "This has to work," Patrick muttered, carefully connecting Nina to the root network. He placed electrodes on her temples and chest, linking them to the plant tendrils that snaked across the forest floor. The first explosions rocked the outskirts of the village as Patrick finished his preparations. He looked up to see Elder Zorn organizing the defense, Ithorian warriors donning the newly created hybrid armor and wielding living weapons that pulsed with biomechanical energy. Patrick forced himself to focus on Nina, monitoring her vital signs as the excess energy began to flow from her body into the surrounding ecosystem. The forest floor glowed faintly, plant life swaying and shifting as it absorbed the power. Minutes dragged by like hours as Patrick watched Nina's condition, adjusting connections and willing her to stabilize. Gradually, the intense luminescence of her skin began to fade, and her breathing grew steadier. Nina's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Patrick's worried face. "What happened?" she asked, her voice weak but clear. Relief flooded through Patrick. "You overloaded yourself," he explained, helping her sit up slowly. "How do you feel?" Nina's brow furrowed in concentration. "Different," she said after a moment. "My connection to the plants, it's evolved. I can sense every root, every leaf, and I can direct them." A thunderous explosion interrupted their reunion. Patrick helped Nina to her feet, supporting her as they moved towards the village's inner defenses. "We need to help," Nina insisted, her strength returning rapidly. Patrick nodded, leading her to a vantage point overlooking the battle. The scene before them was chaos incarnate. Zar'cath energy weapons lanced through the air, met by a writhing mass of plant life that seemed to anticipate each attack. Ithorian warriors, clad in the living armor, moved with fluid grace, their weapons morphing to meet each new threat. Nina closed her eyes, extending her hands towards the fray. The forest responded instantly, vines and roots erupting from the ground to ensnare Zar'cath soldiers. Thorny barriers sprang up, redirecting enemy fire and providing cover for the defenders. "This is incredible," Patrick breathed, watching as Nina reshaped the battlefield with each gesture. Their advantage was short-lived, however. The Zar'cath quickly adapted, deploying weapons that targeted the plant life directly. Sections of the living defenses withered and died under the assault. "They're breaking through," an Ithorian scout called out, pointing towards a gap in their lines. Patrick's tactical mind kicked into high gear. "Nina, can you seal that breach?" She nodded, concentrating intensely. A wall of dense, thorny vegetation sprang up, closing the gap, but as she did so, Patrick noticed movement in his peripheral vision. A small team of Zar'cath commandos, led by a familiar figure, was scaling the central tree of the village. "Lieutenant Vexacor," Patrick growled, recognizing the Zar'cath leader. "They're going for the heart of the settlement. Nina, stay here and coordinate the defense. I'm going after them." Before she could protest, Patrick was moving, gathering a group of Ithorian warriors as he raced towards the central tree. They ascended rapidly, the Ithorians' natural agility in their arboreal environment giving them an edge. The two groups clashed among the winding branches, energy weapons discharging in close quarters. Patrick's human combat techniques meshed surprisingly well with the Ithorians' fluid movements, creating a formidable fighting force. As they battled, Patrick found himself face-to-face with Lieutenant Vexacor. The Zar'cath leader's mandibles clicked in what might have been a sneer. "You've delayed the inevitable, human," Vexacor hissed, raising his weapon. Patrick ducked, the energy blast searing the air where his head had been. He lunged forward, tackling Vexacor. They grappled, teetering on the edge of a massive branch. In the struggle, Patrick felt a searing pain in his leg as Vexacor's blade found its mark. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Patrick managed to disarm the Zar'cath leader, sending his weapon plummeting to the forest floor below. But his injured leg gave way, and he found himself at Vexacor's mercy. Just as the Zar'cath prepared to deliver a finishing blow, the entire tree shuddered. Branches moved of their own accord, wrapping around the remaining commandos. Patrick looked down to see Nina at the base of the tree, her eyes closed in deep concentration. The central tree came alive, its ancient intelligence melding with Nina's enhanced abilities. Wooden tendrils snaked around Vexacor, immobilizing him despite his struggles. "Impossible," the Zar'cath leader snarled, activating a personal shield generator in a last-ditch effort to escape. Nina's control over the plant life proved too strong. The living wood of the tree simply grew through the energy barrier, encasing Vexacor in a cage of intertwined branches. With the immediate threat neutralized, Patrick turned his attention back to the main battle. From their elevated position, he and Nina coordinated a devastating counterattack, using their unique combination of human strategy and Ithorian plant manipulation to push back the Zar'cath forces. As the tide of battle turned in their favor, a new threat loomed. The long-range sensors, tied into the living network of the forest, detected a massive Zar'cath battleship entering orbit. The imposing vessel began deploying fresh troops and equipment, threatening to overwhelm the exhausted defenders. Patrick's heart sank as he watched the reinforcements descend. But before despair could take hold, the communication device he had modified crackled to life. A familiar voice cut through the static. "This is Captain Elena Reyes of the UES Stormbreaker. We've received your distress signal and are moving to engage the Zar'cath forces in orbit. Hold your ground, ground team. Help is on the way." A cheer went up from the Ithorian defenders as they saw the flashes of ship-to-ship combat in the sky above. Patrick turned to Nina, his expression a mix of dedication and hope. "We've got one last push to make," he said, gesturing to the Zar'cath forces regrouping for another assault. "Ready to show them what humans and Ithorians can do together?" Nina nodded, her eyes glowing with power and purpose. As they prepared for the final confrontation, the fate of the Ithorian world hung in the balance, with battles raging both on the surface and in the stars above. As the flashes of orbital combat illuminated the night sky, Patrick and Nina exchanged a determined look. The arrival of human reinforcements had shifted the tide of battle, but victory was far from assured. "Captain Reyes, this is Patrick," he said into his comm device. "We've got a unique situation down here. Our defenses are augmented by Ithorian biotechnology, sending you data now. Nina closed her eyes, focusing on the vast network of plant life surrounding them. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, responding to her newfound connection. Vines and roots writhed beneath the soil, ready to spring into action at her command. "Patrick," she said, her voice tinged with a new sense of power, "I can feel the entire battlefield. Every tree, every blade of grass. I can use them all." He nodded, wincing slightly as he shifted his weight off his injured leg. "That's our advantage. We need to use it to push them back once and for all." As if in response to his words, the sky lit up with streaks of light. Drop pods from the human ships punched through the atmosphere, landing with precision around the village perimeter. Ithorian warriors rushed to retrieve the advanced weaponry and medical supplies contained within. Patrick coordinated with the newly arrived human ground support team, relaying crucial information about the Zar'cath's vulnerabilities. "Their energy shields have a fluctuation cycle," he explained. "If we time our attacks right, we can penetrate their defenses." Meanwhile, Nina extended her influence beyond the village boundaries. The surrounding forest came alive under her control, creating a maze of living barriers and traps. Zar'cath scouts found themselves ensnared by suddenly animated vines, or confronted by impenetrable walls of thorny vegetation that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Elder Zorn approached, now clad in the hybrid biotech armor. The living metal pulsed and shifted, adapting to his movements. "We are ready," he announced, gesturing to a group of similarly equipped Ithorian warriors. Patrick nodded, his tactical mind already formulating a plan. "Take the front line, Elder. Your armor should be able to withstand their energy weapons. Push them back towards the kill zones Nina's creating." As Zorn led the charge, Patrick noticed a weakness in the Zar'cath formation. A gap in their lines, barely visible amidst the chaos of battle. He knew exploiting it could potentially end the conflict, but it would require a dangerous push into enemy territory. "Nina," he said, turning to her with a grim expression, "I need to lead a strike team into their command post. Can you clear us a path?" Nina's eyes widened with concern, but she understood the necessity. Concentrating intensely, she manipulated the plant life to create a hidden tunnel through the battlefield. Dense, interwoven vines and roots formed a protective canopy, offering concealment from Zar'cath sensors. Before Patrick could enter the tunnel, Nina grabbed his arm. "Be careful," she whispered, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. They shared a brief, passionate kiss, both acutely aware it might be their last. As Patrick disappeared into the tunnel with his strike team, Nina turned her attention back to the main battle. She discovered she could accelerate the growth of the hybrid organisms they had developed, rapidly producing more bioweapons and armor for the defenders. "Reinforcements," an Ithorian warrior called out, marveling at the sight of fully formed weapons sprouting from the ground. The unexpected development reinvigorated the Ithorian forces. They pushed forward with renewed vigor, their constantly replenishing supply of advanced weaponry, giving them a significant advantage. In orbit, the UES Stormbreaker engaged in a fierce dogfight with Zar'cath fighters. Captain Reyes's voice crackled over the comm system. "Ground team, we're targeting their battleship's weak points. Stand by for potential debris." The human fleet employed unconventional tactics, using the planet's magnetic field to disrupt the Zar'cath's targeting systems. The sky above Ithoria became a dazzling display of energy weapons and explosions as the space battle raged on. Deep behind enemy lines, Patrick and his strike team fought their way through the Zar'cath command post. The close quarters amplified the intensity of the combat, with energy blasts scorching the walls and the clash of melee weapons echoing through the structure. Despite his injury, Patrick led the charge, his willpower driving him forward. They encountered fierce resistance from the Zar'cath's elite guards, but the hybrid weapons proved devastatingly effective. As they neared the central chamber, Patrick found himself face-to-face with a high-ranking Zar'cath officer. The alien's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or disdain. "You fight well, human," the officer said, its voice a harsh rasp. "But you don't understand why we're here. This planet holds the key to our survival." Patrick hesitated, his weapon trained on the Zar'cath. "What do you mean?" A plague ravages our empire, the officer explained. We believed Ithoria's unique ecosystem could provide a cure. Our methods were aggressive, but our cause is just. The revelation stunned Patrick, adding a new layer of complexity to the conflict. But before he could fully process the information, a massive tremor shook the command post. Outside, Nina experienced a sudden surge in her abilities. The intense stress of battle had triggered an unexpected evolution in her connection to Ithoria's ecosystem. She found herself tapping into the planet's deep fungal networks, accessing a vast planet-wide communication system. Her consciousness expanded, encompassing the entire battlefield. She could sense every movement, every skirmish across the planet's surface. With this newfound awareness, she detected a group of Zar'cath scientists attempting to flee with samples of Ithorian plant life. "Intercept team, northeastern quadrant," she commanded, her voice resonating through the living communication network she now controlled. A squad of Ithorian warriors responded immediately, moving to cut off the escaping scientists. The resulting clash was brief but intense. Energy weapons and biotech weaponry collided, resulting in the destruction of the Zar'cath's research data. The loss dealt a significant blow to the invaders' scientific efforts. As the battle reached its climax, Patrick's team secured the Zar'cath command post. He quickly accessed their communication systems, preparing to broadcast a message to all Zar'cath forces. Simultaneously, a brilliant flash lit up the sky. The UES Stormbreaker had landed a critical hit on the Zar'cath battleship. The massive vessel's engines sputtered and died, and it began a slow, inexorable descent towards the planet's surface. Patrick took a deep breath, keenly aware that his next words could determine the fate of the invasion. He activated the Zar'cath's broadcast system, his voice echoing across the battlefield and into orbit. "Attention, all Zar'cath forces. Your command structure has been compromised, and your battleship is critically damaged. We offer you this one chance to surrender. Lay down your weapons, and we can discuss a peaceful resolution to this conflict." As his words faded, an eerie silence fell over the battlefield. In the heart of the Ithorian village, Nina stood motionless, her body glowing with otherworldly energy. Her consciousness spanned the entire planet, maintaining the delicate balance of power that now existed between the two sides. The fate of Ithoria hung in the balance as both humans and Ithorians waited anxiously for the Zar'cath's response. The next few moments would determine whether this hard-fought battle would end in continued bloodshed or the first steps towards an unexpected peace. Peace or the continuation of a brutal conflict. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant rumble of the damaged Zar'cath battleship as it struggled to maintain its altitude. Suddenly, a new signal cut through the tense quiet. Patrick's eyes widened as he recognized the encryption pattern. It wasn't from any forces on Ithoria. "This is the Zar'cath High Council," a gravelly voice announced, its tone filled with barely held-back desperation. "We request an immediate ceasefire and open negotiations." The battlefield froze. Ithorian warriors exchanged confused glances, while the human reinforcements maintained their defensive positions. Nina, her consciousness still expanded across the planet, sensed a collective intake of breath from both sides. Patrick keyed his comm. "Captain Reyes, are you receiving this?" "Affirmative," she replied, her voice tight with suspicion. "We're verifying the transmission's authenticity now." As the human fleet worked to confirm the message's origin, Elder Zorn approached Patrick and Nina. His biotech armor pulsed with an eerie light, adapting to the sudden lull in combat. "We must convene immediately," Zorn said, his normally stoic features betraying a mix of hope and wariness. "If this is genuine, it could change everything." Patrick nodded, wincing slightly as he put weight on his injured leg. "Agreed. Nina, can you create a secure location for us to meet?" Nina's eyes glowed with otherworldly energy as she reached out to the surrounding plant life. The ground trembled, and a structure of interwoven vines and branches rose from the earth. It formed a domed chamber, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent light. As they entered the living structure, Captain Reyes's voice crackled over the comm. "Ground team, we've confirmed the transmission. It's genuine. The Zar'cath are requesting face-to-face negotiations." Inside the organic meeting room, Patrick, Nina, Elder Zorn, and a holographic projection of Captain Reyes gathered around a table formed from a giant, flat-topped mushroom. The air was thick with tension and the subtle scent of floral spores. "They claim a plague is ravaging their empire," Reyes explained, her holographic form flickering slightly. "They believe Ithoria's unique ecosystem holds the key to their survival." Elder Zorn's tendrils writhed with agitation. "And this justifies an invasion? The destruction of our homes?" "No," Patrick said firmly, "but it might explain their desperation. If we can offer an alternative solution, we might be able to end this conflict without further bloodshed." As they debated the merits of negotiation, Nina suddenly stiffened. Her expanded consciousness had detected something approaching the planet. "A Zar'cath ship is entering the atmosphere," she announced. "It's different from the others, smaller, less heavily armed." Patrick relayed the information to the human fleet, which quickly confirmed Nina's assessment. The vessel was identified as a diplomatic shuttle, carrying a delegation led by the Zar'cath's chief scientist, Zar'loth. With trepidation, the group agreed to allow the shuttle to land in a cleared area at the edge of the Ithorian village. Nina extended her influence, creating a perimeter of sentient plant life around the landing zone, both as a precaution and a show of strength. As the sleek Zar'cath shuttle touched down, its hull gleaming in the alien sunlight, Patrick turned to Nina. "Can you create a neutral structure for the negotiations? Something that will put everyone at ease?" Nina nodded, her eyes unfocused as she communed with Ithoria's flora. The ground rippled, and a magnificent living pavilion sprouted from the earth. Its walls were a tapestry of vibrant flowers and sturdy vines, while the ceiling was a canopy of translucent leaves that allowed dappled sunlight to filter through. Inside, she grew a circular table from the fused trunks of several saplings, surrounded by seats custom-shaped for each species' physiology. As a final touch, she infused the air with a subtle blend of pheromones designed to promote calmness and clear thinking. As the Zar'cath delegation approached, led by the imposing figure of Zar'loth, Patrick took a deep breath. He glanced at Nina, drawing strength from her presence, then stepped forward to greet the aliens who, just hours ago, had been their mortal enemies. "Welcome to Ithoria," Patrick said, his voice steady despite the surreal nature of the situation. "I'm Patrick, and I'll be mediating these discussions." Zar'loth's compound eyes studied Patrick intently. "Your reputation precedes you, human. We have much to discuss, and time is of the essence." As they entered the living pavilion, Nina's heightened senses detected a shift in the atmosphere. The Zar'cath delegation seemed to relax slightly, their aggressive postures softening in response to the calming environment. The negotiations began in earnest, with Zar'loth presenting detailed information about the plague ravaging their empire. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing the devastating effects of the disease on Zar'cath physiology. "Our scientists believe that compounds found in Ithorian plant life could be the key to synthesizing a cure," Zar'loth explained, his mandibles clicking with nearly unleashed excitement. "We came seeking salvation, but our military leaders chose invasion over diplomacy." Elder Zorn leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And what assurances do we have that you won't simply take what you need and leave us vulnerable to future attacks?" As the discussion intensified, Nina found her attention drawn elsewhere. Her connection to Ithoria's vast ecosystem was growing stronger, more refined. She could sense something stirring deep within the planet's fungal networks, a pattern that seemed eerily familiar. Suddenly, an alarm blared from the human comm systems. Captain Reyes's voice cut through the tense atmosphere of the negotiation chamber. "Multiple Zar'cath ships just dropped out of hyperspace," she reported, her tone grim. "It's a massive armada, unlike anything we've seen before. They're on an intercept course with Ithoria." The negotiations ground to a halt as all eyes turned to Zar'loth. The Zar'cath scientist's compound eyes widened in what appeared to be genuine shock. "The extremist faction," he hissed, mandibles clicking rapidly. "They must have followed us. They believe conquest is the only way to save our species." Patrick's mind raced, assessing the new threat. He turned to Nina, whose eyes were glowing with an intense, otherworldly light. "Nina," he said urgently, What can you sense? She blinked, her consciousness snapping back to the present moment. The planet, it's reacting to the approaching Armada. And there's something else. The fungal networks. They contain traces of a disease similar to the Zar'cath plague. Euphoria has been fighting it for millennia. The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Patrick's tactical mind immediately grasped the implications. If Euphoria's ecosystem has natural defenses against a similar contagion, he said slowly, then we might be able to synthesize a cure much faster than we thought. Zar'loth's antenna quivered with excitement. Yes, with our scientific knowledge and your planet's unique biology, we could potentially save both our species. Elder Zorn rose to his feet, his biotech armor pulsing with energy. But first, we must defend Euphoria from this new threat. If the extremists destroy our world in their misguided quest for domination, all hope for a cure will be lost. Patrick nodded grimly, his mind already formulating a plan. He turned to address the group, his voice filled with dedication. We need to combine our strengths, he said. Human technology, Euphorian biology, and Zar'cath energy weapons. Nina, can you accelerate the production of those hybrid bioweapons? Nina closed her eyes, reaching out to the planet's core energy. When she opened them again, they blazed with power. Yes, she said simply, I can create an army. As the unlikely allies began preparations for the coming battle, Patrick caught Nina's eye. They shared a silent moment of understanding, both acutely aware of the monumental task ahead. The fate of 3 species and an entire planet now rested on their ability to work together and harness the full potential of Euphoria's incredible ecosystem. Outside, the sky began to darken as the extremist Zar'cath Armada entered the outer atmosphere. The next few hours would determine the future of interstellar relations, and perhaps the survival of multiple civilizations. Patrick took a deep breath, steadying himself for the challenges to come. All right, he said, addressing the assembled leaders. Let's get to work. We have a planet to defend. Defend. We have a planet to save, Patrick declared, his voice filled with willpower. As if on cue, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The sky outside the living pavilion darkened ominously as the extremist Zar'cath Armada entered Euphoria's outer atmosphere. Patrick's comm unit crackled to life, Captain Reyes's voice cutting through the tense silence. Ground team, the enemy fleet has begun their assault. Our combined forces are engaging them in orbit, but we need to prepare for imminent planetfall. Patrick nodded grimly, turning to address the assembled leaders. We need to move fast. Zar'loth, gather your scientists and head to the secure biolab. Focus on synthesizing that cure. Elder Zorn, coordinate with your warriors to set up defensive positions around key locations. I'll take command of our ground forces. As the others rushed to their assigned tasks, Patrick turned to Nina. Her eyes still glowed with otherworldly energy, her consciousness stretched across the planet's surface. Nina, I need you to be our ace in the hole. Can you accelerate the production of those hybrid bioweapons? Nina nodded, her voice distant yet powerful. I can do more than that, Patrick. I can create an army. Without another word, Nina stepped outside the pavilion. She raised her arms, and the very earth seemed to respond to her call. Massive roots erupted from the ground, twisting and shaping themselves into towering humanoid forms. Vines and leaves wove intricate patterns across their wooden bodies, forming makeshift armor and weaponry. Patrick watched in awe as dozens, then hundreds of these plant golems took shape across the Euphorian landscape, each one pulsed with bioluminescent energy, a physical manifestation of Nina's connection to the planet. Incredible, Patrick breathed before snapping back to the task at hand. He keyed his comm unit. All units, prepare for incoming. We've got some unexpected reinforcements heading your way. As the first wave of extremist drop pods breached the atmosphere, Patrick sprinted towards the front lines. His leg, now fully healed thanks to Euphorian medical technology, carried him swiftly across the transformed landscape. He reached a defensive position manned by a mix of human soldiers, Euphorian warriors, and moderate Zar'cath allies. The unlikely team worked in perfect synchronization, their complementary skills creating a formidable defensive line. Status report, Patrick barked as he slid into cover beside a human sergeant. "Enemy forces deploying in sectors 3 through 7, sir," the sergeant replied, gesturing to a holographic map. "They're trying to establish a beachhead for their main invasion force." Patrick analyzed the map, his tactical mind racing. "They're spreading themselves too thin. We can use that against them." "Lieutenant Kazar," he called to a nearby Zar'cath officer, "take your energy weapons team and target their left flank. Sergeant, I want suppressing fire on their center. Force them to bunch up." As the orders were carried out, the sound of battle intensified. Energy weapons sizzled through the air, meeting the thunderous response of human artillery and the eerie whistle of Ithorian bioprojectiles. Suddenly, the ground beneath the extremist forces erupted. Nina's plant golems burst forth, catching the invaders off guard. The massive wooden constructs moved with surprising speed and agility, their vine-woven limbs lashing out with devastating force. Patrick seized the opportunity, shouting into his comm, "All units, push forward, don't let them regroup." He led the charge, a fusion rifle in his hands, pulsing with Zar'cath energy. Human and Ithorian soldiers flanked him, their movements perfectly coordinated after weeks of joint training. They crashed into the disoriented extremist forces like a tidal wave. The battle raged for hours, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. Patrick found himself in the thick of the fighting, directing troops and engaging in combat with equal skill. His fusion rifles sang a deadly song, each shot finding its mark with unerring accuracy. As he paused to catch his breath behind a fallen Zar'cath walker, Patrick's comm unit crackled to life. It was Zar'loth, his voice tight with excitement and urgency. "Patrick, we've made a breakthrough. We've identified a compound in Ithorian plants that could cure our plague. But there's a problem." Patrick listened intently as Zar'loth explained the situation. The cure could save countless Zar'cath lives and potentially end the conflict, but producing it in sufficient quantities might irreparably damage Ithoria's ecosystem. "I understand," Patrick replied, his mind racing. "Hold your position. I need to consult with Elder Zorn and Nina." As if summoned by his thoughts, Nina's voice echoed in his mind. Through their shared connection, he felt her strain as she maintained control over the plant golems and the enhanced defensive systems. "I heard, Patrick," she said, her mental voice tinged with dedication. "I have an idea, but it's risky. I think I can stimulate the growth of the necessary plants without causing long-term harm to Ithoria, but it will push my abilities to their limit." Before Patrick could respond, a massive explosion rocked the battlefield. He looked up to see a group of elite Zar'cath warriors advancing on his position, their energy weapons cutting through the Allied defenses. "Nina, we'll discuss your plan later," Patrick said urgently. "Right now, I need to deal with this new threat." He readied his weapon and prepared to face the oncoming Zar'cath forces, knowing that the next few moments could determine the fate of the entire planet. Patrick gritted his teeth, raised his fusion rifle, and prepared to meet the oncoming Zar'cath warriors head-on. The battle raged with unrelenting intensity. Patrick's tactical prowess and the combined might of the Allied forces managed to hold the line against the Zar'cath onslaught. Hours blurred into one another as the conflict stretched on, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. As the dust began to settle from the final push, Patrick scanned the battlefield. The toll of the fight was evident in the scarred landscape and the exhausted faces of his allies. His eyes searched frantically until they landed on Nina's crumpled form. "Nina!" he shouted, sprinting across the debris-strewn ground. She lay motionless, her skin pale and her breathing shallow. The strain of maintaining control over the plant golems and enhancing Ithoria's defenses had pushed her abilities beyond their limits. Patrick carefully gathered Nina in his arms, cradling her head against his chest. "Hold on," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I've got you." With renewed urgency, Patrick carried Nina's weakened form towards the Ithorian medical facility. The advanced healing pods, now enhanced with human medical technology, stood ready to receive patients. As Patrick gently lowered Nina into one of the pods, the soft blue light enveloped her still form. He refused to leave her side, his hand intertwined with hers as the pod's healing energies pulsed around them. "Come on, Nina," Patrick murmured, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. You've got to pull through this. Over the next few days, as Nina's condition slowly stabilized, the aftermath of the battle unfolded around them. Representatives from all three species worked tirelessly to implement Nina's solution for synthesizing the cure. Patrick watched from Nina's bedside as Ithorian botanists, human biochemists, and Zar'cath geneticists collaborated in an unprecedented display of interspecies cooperation. The secure biolab buzzed with activity as they raced against time to produce the cure without causing harm to Ithoria's delicate ecosystem. Zar'loth entered the medical facility, his compound eyes fixed on Nina's still form. "How is she?" he asked, his mandibles clicking softly. Patrick sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Stable, but still unconscious. The doctors say her body needs time to recover from the strain." The Zar'cath scientist nodded solemnly. "Her sacrifice may have saved us all. We've successfully synthesized the cure, Patrick. Initial tests show promising results without any negative impact on Ithoria's ecosystem." A wave of relief washed over Patrick. He squeezed Nina's hand gently, wishing she could hear the news. "That's incredible, Zar'loth. How soon can we begin distribution?" "We're already coordinating with the moderate faction to spread the treatment across our empire," Zar'loth replied. "As news of the cure spreads, the remaining extremist forces are laying down their arms. The plague that drove us to such desperate measures is finally receding." Patrick nodded, his eyes never leaving Nina's face. "Thank you, Zar'loth, for everything." As the Zar'cath scientist left, Patrick settled back into his vigil. Days passed, blending into weeks as Nina's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. Her connection to Ithoria's ecosystem, while still present, gradually returned to a more manageable level. Patrick spent every free moment by her side, talking to her about the rapidly changing world outside. He described the historic treaty being drafted between humans, Ithorians, and Zar'cath, establishing guidelines for peaceful coexistence, scientific exchange, and mutual defense. "You should see it, Nina," he said softly, stroking her hand. "Everything we fought for is coming to fruition. Ithoria is being declared a protected planet with strict regulations to preserve its unique ecosystem." As if in response to his words, Nina's fingers twitched in his grasp. Patrick leaned forward, his heart racing as her eyelids fluttered open. "Patrick," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I'm here," he replied, relief flooding through him. "You're safe. We did it, Nina. We won." Tears welled up in Nina's eyes as Patrick filled her in on everything that had transpired during her recovery. As her strength returned, they spent hours in quiet conversation, their bond deepening through shared experiences and the promise of a future together. Weeks passed, and the day of the treaty signing arrived. Patrick helped Nina prepare, supporting her as she took her first steps outside the medical facility. The Ithorian sunlight washed over them, warm and welcoming. "There's something I want to show you," Patrick said, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "before the ceremony begins." Hand in hand, they made their way to a familiar glade, the spot where they had first encountered the night bloom. The bioluminescent flower, now in full bloom, bathed them in its ethereal light. Nina gasped, taking in the beauty of the scene. "Patrick, it's magnificent." Patrick took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He turned to face Nina, taking both of her hands in his. "Nina, these past few months have been the most challenging and rewarding of my life. You've shown me the true beauty of this world, and in doing so, you've changed mine forever." Slowly, he dropped to one knee, presenting a ring fashioned from a blend of human alloys and Ithorian living crystal. The band seemed to pulse with its own inner light, a perfect representation of their union. "Nina," Patrick said, his voice filled with emotion, "will you marry me?" Nina's eyes widened, a smile spreading across her face as tears of joy spilled down her cheeks. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Patrick, I will." As their lips met in a passionate kiss, the surrounding plants burst into activity, responding to Nina's overwhelming joy. Flowers bloomed out of season, vines curled and danced, and the very air seemed to hum with life. They laughed, embracing amidst the swaying foliage, their love a testament to the new era of interspecies harmony. As they made their way back to the treaty signing ceremony, hand in hand, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not just as partners, but as a bridge between worlds.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.